On. Here we go. Good morning, guys, or good afternoon or evening, wherever you may be listening to us. Uh, we are doing episode 4 here. We're going to talk a little bit about Chickamauga with the upcoming 160th anniversary coming up. I got Ben Flowerday and Ben Quina here with me as usual.
Gentlemen,
Good to
Morning.
see you guys. Had a little bit of a wacky schedule conflict this week, so we're doing this a little earlier than we're used to. Pretty sure, at least I'm still here drinking coffee, but I don't know what you guys are drinking. But
Yeah, I got coffee. Unfortunately, no Baileys or anything either.
ginger ale for me.
there we go. Head on. Well, I'm also rocking my EAC RD3 right here with some Sergeant stripes on it. This is an older jacket. I forget who made this. I think it's Charlie Child's cloth, though. I got it on the trade blanket a while ago. And this is an old Avery Miller made hat, Goober Grabber.
Nice. I'm
Very
rocking
nice.
a Avery Miller cappy here. This might
Nice.
be my favorite cappy that I've ever owned. It's just a pretty basic early-ish war. It's got the
Yeah, see, you
black
got the
band on it, leather brim. It has a
only
chin strap, but I'm replacing the buttons on it. So yeah, it fits perfect. Avery's the guy I can actually send a head measurement to and just be 100% sure that the cap's gonna fit perfectly right out of the box. So
nice.
that's pretty awesome.
Only the best for Mrs. Flowerday's boy.
Yeah.
And I've
um,
got a J. Crew issue 2022 button down shirt for my legal work today. So
But believe it or not, Ben's gainfully employed, whereas Dylan and I are dealing with our own stuff here right now.
so
nice.
what time are you going to be at the event this weekend, Mr. Flowerday?
Leaving Detroit at about noon or 1, I think.
Is that app
Uh
again?
I'm sorry.
Is that app for you guys this weekend?
So it's in Holland, Michigan, which is on the western edge of Michigan. So basically where I live, it's on the exact opposite side of Michigan for me. So it's about 3 hours. I'm driving down with a friend from a different unit, but he lives close to me. So we're shooting to be to the event like mid to late afternoon on Friday.
Yeah,
Trying to
that should
beat
be a good time. It's a
Detroit traffic out of here.
smaller event, very mainstream. So should be a good time though. We
I
always
would I
have
would say it's mainstream-ish, but the event site is much more conducive to hosting a Civil War event than something like Jackson, where it's in the middle of a city. Like the Van Raalte farm site is really nice.
It's actually the farmstead of a former Union veteran, Benjamin Van Raalte, who built the house and lived there in the post-war years. So it's got some historical meaning to it.
Didn't he
So
win the Medal of Honor on the Atlanta campaign?
I I think so. He was in the West. I do know that.
Yeah, I think it was Utoy Creek is the battle that
Yeah.
he saved the regimental colors or something. And anyway,
We could
love the
do it.
history.
We could do a story on that sometime. That'd be kind of cool.
There you go. Prepping for the 160th Chickamauga with an event the weekend before. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're portraying Gettysburg because it's only a week off from the 160th Chickamauga. It's a few months after Gettysburg. It's the year ends in 3, so it has to be Gettysburg.
Yeah, that's
Not
the only,
even not
the only
even Bristow or Mine Run or anything else that happened in 63. Just Gettysburg. It's the
that's
only
something
thing that
a
happened.
little bit today. This is not only the biggest battle in the West that we're going to be talking about, but this is the second biggest battle of the entire war right here. And I think it's really, I mean, it happens in the same year as Gettysburg. There's just so much destruction this year that's going on, and everyone only focuses on Gettysburg. But
Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, Chickamauga it's a big one, and it's like you said, I think it's the second most casualties of the war
yep, second only to
for a battle. You know,
Trivia. Anyone know the third?
probably something in the Overland campaign.
You sound disappointed to say that.
Well, no, that's just because you always seem to bring everything around to the Overland campaign.
Maybe.
It's fine. I mean, it's fine, but what is it, Ben? Now that you've teased us,
It's the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse.
Spotsylvania Courthouse, yes. All right. Well, let's get back to Chickamauga. Dylan, go.
Redirecting there.
Let's just mute Ben for a while.
I know, right? If we're talking about 63.
With a 3. Yeah.
Figure out real quick how to get back to my, there we go. Oh. Okay. Now I'm dealing with the same things that Ben was dealing with last week. How do I share my screen right here?
So Ben, what time are you gonna get to Holland here this weekend?
I'm going to leave after I drop my son off to school. I'm going to go set up, probably leave here about 9 o'clock.
Real
Okay.
quick, it says host disabled participant screening.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
well, let's
Screen share.
rectified that here.
Yeah, because I tried to click that right now and it said
Well, I
no,
didn't do that intentionally.
no share screen for you.
There we go.
Seinfeld reference, if anybody got that.
All right,
Sorry.
try now.
All right, sharing screen. Share.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, I
Let.
see it. It's up. We're good.
Okay. Just figure out how to start it.
I have to say, I think the Hardy flag might be my favorite flag of the war.
Great. It's a great flag.
It's just so unique and different from the other ones.
And it was allowed to be in the Army. Some of the versions were allowed to be in the Army even after they standardized the Dalton flag.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Was it Hardy? And then was Polk's flag completely kicked out after the Dalton consolidation, or no?
I don't know, but I think for the most part they went to that Dalton pattern flag. But some of the units, I think, in Claiborne's division,
Yep.
I
So
think we're still allowed to have that Hardy
Okay.
pattern.
this is Claiborne right here in Chickamauga. I love this painting right here. You see all the guys busting open the ammo crates, throwing out as much arsenal packs as they can to everybody, just keeping it hot. This is just such a great depiction of the battle right here.
Yeah,
Now
I
that's
can't see it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's still. It's
It says
saying
screen
low.
zoom share. What's going on? It says your screen sharing is paused. Resume share. Click. Nothing's happening. Damn it. See, this is me and technology every time. I'm going to bring in a technical assistant here. Stand by. Sorry, we'll try and get this figured out here real quick. You guys still have the loading thing or no?
Yeah.
It says loading.
So yeah, Johnston, I mean, maybe was a little bit scared of fighting, but at least he got everyone on the same flag. You know, the important things.
For the most part, yeah. I mean, I'm just not a big Johnson fan. I
know.
think his
There we
men
go.
loved him. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Okay,
Also, I want to, in terms of events, I wish there was more throwing around and busting up ammo crates and stuff like that. I think that's something that we don't do enough.
see that at battle events, guys running out with ammo resupplies ever. Like that would be so cool. Just having a bunch of ammo crates ready to just break apart and throw ammo everywhere. That would take a lot of prep though. That's for sure.
If only we knew a guy that made ammo.
Yeah, if only at Jim Kraken Bunkum. All right, here we go. So we have the Battle of Chickamauga, September 20th or September 18th through 20th, 1863. This is a painting of Cleburne's men at Lower Brotherton Field. The bloodiest and most uncalled for battle fought during the whole war. Private Sam Watkins, 1st Tennessee Infantry Regiment.
Quick quiz. What regiment was the 1st Tennessee consolidated with at Chickamauga?
The 27th.
Bingo.
Ooh.
Good job, Dylan. Well
First-
done.
That's the 1st and 27th Tennessee Regiment were consolidated together in Maney's brigade.
Very good. Very well done.
Thank you,
And
Matt.
they kept consolidation. That was the 1st and 27th at the dead angle at Kennesaw too, right?
Yep.
Correct.
So, okay, there we go. So yeah, Battle of Chickamauga painting right here. This is actually a painting of the 2nd day. We have our main commanders on both sides here. Major General William S. Rosecrans and Major General Braxton Bragg. Braxton Bragg is going to come into the fight with 65,000 men total. A little bit unusual for Confederates to be outnumbering their Federal counterparts here, but Braxton Bragg is actually going to have the numerical superiority in this battle compared to Rosecrans' 60,000 men. 125,000 total engaged, and then there's going to be an estimated 34,000 casualties after the battle. 18,454 on the Confederate side and around 16,170 on the Federal side. So this is the breakdown of the Army of Tennessee that we're going to have at the battle. We're going to have Polk's Corps, Hill's Corps, Buckner's Corps, Longstreet, and then Walker and Wheeler, who actually don't get along at all. So they're going to be technically separate commands. Forrest and Wheeler is going to be separate commands here. There we go. I'm going to get rid of that right there so I can actually see what I'm doing.
And so at the beginning of the battle, though, right, we've got the Army's in 3 corps because Longstreet hasn't technically showed up, right?
No, all these troops are going to be filtering in throughout
Right.
the campaign. Actually, I'm kind of just showing everyone that's going to be involved in the battle here.
Okay.
Now, did any of these guys get along or not really?
Yeah, so pretty much every single one of these guys hate each other, and then but especially they all have one thing in common: they all hate Bragg. So this is just a very an army filled with dissension, and it's going to play into the campaign immensely. We're going to see here, and it's not letting me go forward for some reason. Oh, there we go. So we're going to, and then also we're going to have Walker's Reserve Corps is going to be a part of that army as well, led by William H.T. Walker. He's going to have 2 divisions under him, under Brigadier General States R. Geist and Brigadier General St. John R. Liddell, who are pictured both right here and here.
Bates Wright's gist.
Yep. And then Leonidas Polk is going to lead the 1st Corps of the Army of Tennessee with 2 divisions under Benjamin Cheatham and Thomas Hinman. Benjamin Cheatham's division is going to include Maney's Brigade, which is the 1st and 27th Consolidated Regiments, included in that under Colonel Hume R. Field, which is the regiment that Private Sam Watkins is, of course, a part of, wrote the famous Company H, the firsthand account of a Confederate soldier in the West throughout the whole war. If you haven't read that book, that's a must read for pretty much every Civil War buff that's out there. And then we're going to have Hinman's division, which is going to include Brigadier General Patton Anderson's brigade, which my ancestor David Laird was a part of the 7th Mississippi Regiment, which is a part of that brigade, which is going to be heavily engaged here in Chickamauga. And then there's Private Sam Watkins right there. So next we are going to have Daniel Hill's Corps. He's going to have another 2 divisions under him, underneath Patrick Claiborne and John Breckinridge. Funny little anecdote, actually, real quick. When I lived in Tennessee, we lived in an area called Breckinridge Estates, which was a super windy road filled with like urban housing, and the road actually followed the path that Breckinridge took on his way to Shiloh.
Hmm.
So in Claiborne's division, you're going to have Sterling Woods Brigade, which hosts the 18th Alabama under John Gibson, who's attached to the 33rd Alabama Battalion. This is the regiment that we portrayed at the Liberty Rifles event, Rosecrans Pursuit, back in 2021. So a lot of fun. And then Brigadier General Lucius Polk's brigade is also a part of this division, not to be confused with the Corps commander, Leonidas Polk. Stovall's brigade is going to include the 1st and 3rd Consolidated Florida Regiments, which is in Breckinridge's division. I'm obviously the big Florida history nerd here, so I gotta throw a shout out to the Florida regiments there. The 4th Florida is also going to be in that division under Colonel Bowen.
I think we portrayed the 4th Florida at Missionary Ridge. Is that correct, Ben?
We did. Yes, we did.
And is
Yeah,
it Washington Ives was part of that? He wrote some of the most detailed uniform descriptions I've ever seen in diaries.
That's
about
cool.
The stuff that they were issued.
Yeah, I actually wasn't at that event, but I don't hear many great things that came out of it.
It was cold.
It was a fridge or whatever, right?
Missionary Fridge is the name that we've given it.
It was cold.
That'll happen. So here we're gonna have Simon Boulevard Buckner, and he's gonna have a corps with another 2 divisions, led by General Alexander P. Stewart, who is going to include William Bates Brigade with the 58th Alabama under Colonel Bushrod Jones, not to be confused with Brigadier General Bushrod Johnson. I just thought it was crazy that 2 guys have this name.
I did not know that.
Bushrod Jones is the commander of the 58th Alabama.
Huh.
And then you're going to have William Preston's division, which also include a few Florida regiments as well. The 6th through 7th Florida Infantry, as well as the 1st Florida Cavalry, which were fighting dismounted during the battle. They're going to be in Robert Triggs Brigade. And then Buckner's Artillery Reserve also includes McCants Florida Battery under command of Major General Samuel C. Williams. So a lot of Florida troops actually present at this battle. And then you're going to have Lieutenant General James Longstreet, which of course looks just like this statue right here.
Yeah.
Can be found. Mark.
It's Tom Berenger on a Shetland pony.
The horse is the size of a big dog. That's the thing. And then they make him a life-size man on top of it.
It's like riding Sandy at Meyer. If you're from Michigan, you may get that reference.
To me, somebody told AI to make Santa Claus in a Confederate uniform riding a large dog.
It's terrible.
The horse looks distressed too. Look at the facial expression. Doesn't look happy to be there.
And then, of course, General John Bell Hood, who is going to actually be entering the campaign in a slow recovering from his wound received at Gettysburg without the use of his right arm. He is actually going to command the 1st Corps upon his arrival before Longstreet gets there. General Bushrod Johnson's division, yes, that is actually his name, is going to be attached to the Corps. He actually has his own provisional division full of Mississippi troops as well. And then his brigade in there is going to be commanded by John S. Fulton as well. He's also going to include John Gregg's brigade, which consists entirely of Tennessee regiments, except for the 9th Georgia Artillery, 7th Texas, and a Missouri battery of artillery. And then you have Law, Brigadier General Evander M. Law's division, who is actually going to command the entirety of Hood's division while he's commanding the Corps. Robertson, Benning, and Law's brigade make up this division, and then Law's brigade is going to be commanded by James Sheffield. And then you're going to have Kershaw, who's also going to be in there. Kershaw is actually going to be the only brigade that continues to fight with Johnson on the attack on the 3rd day after Hood gets wounded. Benning and Robertson and Law are all going to retire and not engage the rest of the day. Is it doing this to me again? And then we have the Cavalry Corps of the Army of Tennessee, Joseph Wheeler's Cavalry, and Nathan Bedford Forrest. Dun, dun, dun. And then we're going to get into the Army of the Cumberland combatants, commanded by Major General William Stark Rosecrans. Commander of the 14th Corps, you're going to have Major General George H. Thomas. 20th Corps, Major General Alexander McCook. 21st Corps is going to be Thomas L. Crittenden, and you're also going to have a reserve corps under General Gordon Granger. 21st Corps is going to, I'm sorry, the 14th Corps is going to be led by Major General George H. Thomas, who will earn himself the nickname the Rock of Chickamauga after this battle. He's actually going to have 4 divisions in his corps. This is the largest of the forces in the Army of the Cumberland. First Division is going to be commanded by General Absalom Baird. And there you have the 1st Division 14th Corps flag. 3 brigades of infantry, 3 batteries of artillery. The 3rd Brigade is going to be under the command of Brigadier General John H. King, and it's all U.S. Army regular veterans. These are United States troops, not state or volunteer troops. So these guys are the crack troops of the brigade, of the division. And then the 2nd Brigade commander of that division is also going to be wounded, John C. Starkweather. Then you have the 2nd Division under Major General James Negley. And there you have his division flag. 3 brigades of infantry and 3 brigades of artillery as well, which is going to be the same across all the divisions. Timothy Stanley, commander of the 2nd Brigade of this division, is going to be wounded in the fight. And Colonel William Stoughton is the one that takes over that brigade. And then you have Brannan's division under Brigadier General John Brannan. Also, 3 brigades of infantry, 3 batteries of artillery. Croxton is going to be wounded. He's the 2nd Brigade commander. And then we have the 4th Division commander, Major General Joseph J. Reynolds. And his division is going to include the famous Lightning Brigade under Colonel John T. Wilder, who are armed with the Spencer repeating rifles. They're also going to actually, before they get the nickname Lightning Brigade, they're going to have the nickname the Hatchet Brigade, because they were all issued long handle hatchets to go with their rifles. th Corps is going to be under command of Major Alexander McDowell McCook. He's going to have 3 divisions under his command. 1st Division is Brigadier General Jefferson C. Davis. And then you have Richard W. Johnson, the command of the 2nd Division. And then 3rd Division is going to be Brigadier General Philip H. Sheridan. You have here all of the corps flags of the 20th Corps, which is just a big 5-point star. All 3 of these divisions are also going to have 3 brigades of infantry and 3 batteries of artillery. Davis's 1st Brigade is going to be actually detached guarding trains, so he's going to be down 1 brigade, and his 3rd Brigade commander, Colonel Hans Hang, will be mortally wounded. And as well as the 20th Corps 3rd Brigade commander, Colonel Philemon P. Baldwin, will be killed. And the 1st Brigade commander of Sheridan's division, William H. Little, will also be mortally wounded. If you are attending the 160th Chickamauga, we will be portraying a regiment or at least me and Ben will be falling in with the 27th Illinois, which is going to be the 3rd Brigade here under Philip Sheridan. Their commander, Luther P. Bradley, will also be wounded on the on their first day in action, which is the 19th, and then Colonel Nathan Walworth will take command for the regiment on the third day of combat when the entire division gets routed. 21st Corps. Oh, dang it, I messed that one up. You're going to have 3 divisions under here. Palmer also is going to be a part of that, who gets promoted to command of the 14th Corps when Thomas takes over. And then you have Brigadier General Thomas Wood of the 1st Division and Van Cleve of the 3rd Division. They have a funky Corps flag right here. I thought that was kind of crazy. So the 1st Division under Wood is also, the 2nd Brigade is also going to be missing at that one. So he's going to be down a brigade. And then you have Granger's Reserve Corps under Gordon Granger, 2 divisions under him, but really it's just a division in a brigade. Steedman is going to lead, Brigadier General James Steedman is going to lead the 1st Division of the Reserve Corps. He only has 2 brigades of infantry and 2 batteries of artillery. And Colonel Daniel McCook Jr., one of many McCooks in the Army of Cumberland, is going to be commanding the 2nd Brigade, which is all there is in the 2nd Division of the Reserve Corps. All right, so those are all the forces that are going to be engaged here at Chickamauga. Let's go back and look at 1863, kind of overall, to get a picture of where we're at here. So we have some major Confederate victories in the East in the beginning of the year, Chancellorsville. And then we also have, you know, this whole sentiment in the North where a lot of people are growing weary. It's a lot longer than it's lasting a lot longer than they thought it would. Obviously, the casualty rates that are coming in are just shocking everybody to death, and people are growing tired of it. And the South is going to look to exploit that. And then you have 2 major federal victories in July that are kind of going to bring their spirits back up in this whole war. You have Gettysburg, where you're going to lose more than 28,000 men in Lee's army, almost a third of his whole force in the Army of Northern Virginia. And then you're going to have 30,000 more that surrender at Vicksburg. And so you're going to have almost 60,000 men that the Confederacy loses almost on the same day in this year. And so it's just a major, major blow to the Confederacy, but huge, huge wins for the North at the same time. And so now Lincoln is going to be looking at this like, okay, well, Meade at least, you know, kicked Lee out of Pennsylvania. Grant got a huge surrender in Vicksburg. Like, what are you doing, Rosecrans? You pushed him a little bit farther out of Tennessee than he was, but it's not going to be comparable in Lincoln's eyes to what Rosecrans has going on. So Lincoln and Stanton are going to be pressuring Rosecrans to really put the hurt on Bragg at the start of this campaign. So then 1863, specifically in the Western Theater, it's going to start out with some good news in a way. December 31st, 1862 to January 1st on 1863, you have the Battle of Stones River or Murfreesboro, which is kind of it's undecided technically, but eventually Bragg is going to concede Murfreesboro, which technically makes it a Confederate loss. So he pulls out, Bragg pulls out of Murfreesboro and establishes a new headquarters in Tullahoma. And then both armies spend the winter with basically doing what they do in every winter in every theater of the war, and just launching unsuccessful cavalry raids around the enemy and trying to disrupt supply lines that eventually get rebuilt and don't do too much real damage. And then in June, Halleck really starts pressuring Rosecrans to begin a move against Bragg, because he's waited this whole time rebuilding forces and supplies and railroads and basically just delaying. And then officially on June 24th is when Rosecrans will send word that operations have begun in what is known as the Tullahoma Campaign. Uh-oh. My background picture didn't load for this one. It's just a map of the Tullahoma Campaign, which sucks. Well, can't see the map, but we'll go over it anyway. So Bragg is going to pull out of Murfreesboro and establish a new line with Polk on the left and Hardee on the right. Polk is going to be in and around Shelbyville, and then Hardee is going to be in around Fairfield. And this is where Colonel John T. Wilder is going to earn the nickname for his brigade, the Lightning Brigade, by rushing to Hoover's Gap and capturing it on the very first day of the campaign. Granger's Reserve Corps is going to be feinting attacks on Bragg's left to keep his attention in around Shelbyville. Meanwhile, the 20th Corps moves north to exploit Thomas's breakthrough. Obviously, Thomas has Wilder's brigade. And then they go on a raid to destroy supply lines in Bragg's rear. Hardee and Polk, basically, they're going to essentially convince Bragg that Tullahoma defenses are inadequate and he should pull out. So he orders a withdrawal to Cohen. And then Bragg decides Cohen is also not a good defensive position. Without even calling a meeting with his corps commanders, orders a retreat to Chattanooga. You're going to see some similar things here, Quina, I think, with Johnston and Bragg. Though the two don't have a great relationship, they pretty much are the same general in my eyes. It's wake up and what a great day to retreat throughout the whole campaign.
So the Tullahoma campaign for our listeners is basically a series of maneuvers to get Bragg to fall back to those Chattanooga defenses from Middle Tennessee.
Exactly. It's just a series of feints and maneuvering and deception to try and basically just push Bragg out of Tennessee without a fight, and it works brilliantly. And this is Rosecrans' high point. You have to understand, like, for him, this was a huge deal. He had pushed all of the Army of Tennessee pretty much completely out of Tennessee. You have a whole bit still in Knoxville under Johnson, and I'm sorry, under Buckner.
Yeah.
Up there. And but other than that, Bragg is out of Tennessee with minimal losses to Rosecrans' forces. So he's looking at it as a huge win. But as I mentioned earlier, Lincoln and Stanton don't see it quite as that. They're looking at it more as like, well, you didn't destroy him. Meanwhile, there's 30,000 losses in the Confederate Army in the West, and then another almost 30,000 in Pennsylvania over here. So they're looking at it like he needs to step up the pressure a bit. So at the start of the renewed hostilities, Army of Tennessee is going to number only about 44,000 men at the start of August. Bragg believes this is to be no match against the Army of Cumberland's 60,000 men and is going to request reinforcements from Richmond. After deciding what to do, there was actually like much concern about what they were going to do. There was several options. Davis wanted to maybe replace Bragg with another force and replace him with command, but decides overall that he's just going to reinforce he's going to reinforce Bragg with Buckner from his department in East Tennessee in Knoxville. And then Hardee is actually going to be fed up and ask for a transfer to the Army of Mississippi, and then D.H. Hill is going to come in and replace him. Longstreet is then ordered from the Army of Northern Virginia to also go and reinforce him with his corps. He's going to leave Pickett's division in Virginia and only take with him his 2 divisions. Unfortunately, when Buckner pulls out of Knoxville, they abandon the railway there. So now there's no straight way, from Virginia. The quickest way would have been to go from Virginia to Knoxville and then down to Chattanooga. Now Longstreet is actually going to have to go over 900 miles down through the Carolinas and then to Atlanta and then north towards Chickamauga, which is the main reason why he doesn't arrive until the day of the battle. And then 9,000 troops are going to be filtering in this first week of August here from the Army of Mississippi, survivors that were still in the field under Johnson. And they're going to form under Johnston, and they're going to form up under Bushrod Johnson. So when they were in front of Chattanooga, Bragg had a cavalry screen going around the whole river, basically. He had Forrest up on the north, guarding crossings north of Chattanooga, and then he had Wheeler covering crossings south of the river. The reason he put Wheeler there was because Wheeler had a larger force. Unfortunately, most of Wheeler's men were exhausted from the campaign for whatever reason, and Wheeler decides to put most of them into resting camps and actually only has 3 regiments covering the entirety of his sector, which is, I forget how long, but it is very, very thin line, and it does not have adequate men to cover all the crossings, and then also not enough men to quickly deliver information to Bragg to inform him of crossings. So basically, they're gonna feint crossings north of the river. Here, I'll get to that in a second. Let me go back a little bit. So Rosecrans, feeling pressure from Washington, needs to take Chattanooga as a major transportation hub. You got lots of railways going through Chattanooga that all lead to the deep south. And with Vicksburg and the Mississippi taken, this is now becoming the heartland of the Confederacy, where all their supplies are being shipped to Virginia from, and then also to the armies there in the deep south and in the west. So the plan for Rosecrans at this point, after the Tullahoma campaign, is to cross the Cumberland Plateau, which is a very, very big stretch of terrible terrain in northwest Georgia. And Bragg knows it's going to take him some time to get across that because he was just dealing with that whole terrain disaster. He's going to feint cross. So this is where we get to the crossings in the river. So Rosecrans is actually going to feint crossings north of the river upstream, and the actual crossings are going to happen down south in Wheeler's sector, and the real crossings are actually going to happen at Bridgeport and Stevenson, Alabama. On August 29th, the first part of Rosecrans's forces are going to get across the river, and then on September 8th, by the time they're all the way to the river, they have taken Lookout Mountain, and from the top of Lookout Mountain, federal scouts are observing Bragg pulling out of Chattanooga, basically without a fight at all, with the word that from Wheeler that federal forces were coming across the river, decides to abandon without even giving a fight, decides that they're better off pulling them out across the river and then into open territory and being able to hopefully destroy them one piece at a time as they come across. Once they get into Chattanooga, Rosecrans is going to decide to continue the campaign and pursue Bragg despite advice and caution from General Thomas. So Thomas is actually going to be trying to convince Rosecrans that they should wait and bring up the rest of the army in Chattanooga and consolidate his forces. But Rosecrans, feeling the pressure, decides to just keep on pushing, and he is actually going to assume that Bragg is probably retreating all the way to Rome. He doesn't think that Bragg is going to stop and give a fight. He thinks he's going to run and catch Bragg's rear guards.
There were also, some of the things that I read too was that during this specific time, Bragg utilized deserters from his army to tell the federal officers to pass up the chain of command that they were in full retreat. He also had civilians tell the federal high command all this. So the federal high command thinks Bragg's army is on their last legs.
Yeah, and that's a big thing too, because they're in, eastern Tennessee and northern Georgia. This is all very heavy Unionist sentiment area. They, if they're hearing that the Confederate Army is in full retreat, that's good news to them. And there's a lot of people that are giving reports to to the federal high command. It's actually going to be a bit of a problem, and it's part of the reason why that Rosecrans hesitates a little bit in Chattanooga, because he's getting conflicting reports from civilians. Some are saying that before he gets into Chattanooga, he's had civilians in there that are saying like, oh, Bragg's going to hold until the last, and then you have some civilians in the same day that are saying that, oh no, there's no forces here at all. So it's a little bit hard for them to decipher what's going on. So yeah, it was smart for Bragg to use that to his advantage, actually, giving conflicting reports to them themselves, the deserters and the civilians, to pass to the high command and confuse them with the Federals. Yeah, interesting note there. So here we have a painting of men going into action in Chickamauga. We call this Opportunities Lost. So Bragg's actually going to halt his forces near Ringgold in northwest Georgia, and a new line with Polk he's going to form on his right, and in between Lee and Gordon's Mills and Glass Mills is where he's going to put Polk. Buckner is going to be in the center of the line near Catlett's Gap, and then D.H. Hill is going to be on the left near Doug Gap in Pigeon Mountain. Walker's Reserve Corps is going to be in and west of Lafayette, facing south. Forrest Cavalry is going to screen Bragg's right, and then Wheeler's is going to screen the left, south of Lafayette. And basically, what Bragg wants to do is he wants to draw Rosecrans out and destroy his army one corps at a time. He figures he's going to have to split them up to cover the terrain of the Cumberland Plateau Gap, and then he's also going to have to, when he crosses the river. So once he gets word that Federals are coming down through the gaps, he orders Hinman and Cleburne to attack what's going to end up being Negley's 2nd Division of the 14th Corps at McClemmer's Cove near Davis's Crossroads on September 10th. This is going to be basically Bragg's best chance for destroying Rosecrans' army one corps at a time, like he actually initially planned. But this is going to be, there's just so many problems here. So Bragg, bad communication, paranoia, utter laziness, and incompetence caused Bragg's battle plans to completely fall apart.
Hinman.
What was that?
Hindman screwed it all up.
Hinman screwed it up pretty bad. You're also going to have some big screw ups from Cleburne, I believe.
D.H. Hill too.
D.H. Hill as well. Basically all it comes down to is all of Bragg's orders either don't get there, get miscommunicated or misunderstood, and then the Federals realize that they're in a big trap in this cove. So what this cove is it's like a big V shape in the gap in the mountain. And once the Federals are in there, they have to funnel through, and it's basically a big choke point. And Bragg wants to pin them against the mountain and just crush them. And all because of bad timing and this miscommunication with Bragg's orders, everything's going to fall apart, and Bragg's just going to call off the whole attack and order everyone back.
I think some of Bragg's orders were definitely maybe perhaps vague and allowed some discretion, but from my research of this, Hinman and others just flat out refused to follow his orders. And it's just unconscionable. And you're going to see the same thing in a couple of days at Vine Springs Road Church or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, what's going to happen at Davis's Crossroads, which is right outside of McClemmer's Cove.
I think we lost him.
Done.
Hinman's combined force would have been 12,000 men over Negley's 4,000 to 5,000 men. Hill says he didn't receive the orders until dawn, and then by then, Hinman is stopped outside of Morgan's Farm, which is 4 to 5 miles north of Davis's Crossroads. Hill tells Bragg his men are spread out through Pigeon Mountain, and basically there's too many felled trees and obstacles in the gaps, and pretty much every excuse in the book to organize a rapid concentration of his forces. And supposedly Cleburne was sick, too sick. And so Bragg is furious, and he gets this message at 8 a.m. And then furiously just orders Cleburne moving to get moving ASAP. Also orders Buckner's corps to go up and reinforce Hinman. And then that total combined force would have been 16,000 men. So Negley's division then pushed all the way into the town of Davis's Crossroads on the 10th of September. Buckner gets his orders at 11 a.m., but his men wouldn't be at Morgan's Farm until 4 p.m. that day. The intended attack on the 10th fails, and then preparations are made to do it on the 11th. That night, Bragg is sending messages to Hinman, stressing the importance of the attack, saying the 21st Corps is pushing south toward Ringgold, 20th Corps is coming up towards Lafayette from the south. And then that night, Bragg meets with Hill at Lafayette, and Hill is more worried about the 20th Corps coming up from the south, dismissing Negley's movements as a feint. He's saying that Negley's whole deal in the Cove is a feint to draw them out so that they can get crushed by McCook coming up from the south. The Federals assume Bragg is retreating all the way to Rome, and they expect Lafayette to be completely abandoned. So then Bragg says that Breckinridge's division and Walker's Reserve Corps could hold off the 20th Corps. So he's trying to ease Hill's worry about the 20th Corps. And then Hinman and Cleburne have a meeting at Morgan's farm where they talk about all their worries about the 21st Corps coming in from the north. They think that they're worried about forces getting to Lee and Gordon's mill and getting into their rear. And so Hinman has this obsession that the 21st Corps is going to get into his rear. He keeps sending messages to Bragg. And then they decide in Cleburne and Hinman's ultimate combined wisdom, they decide that the best way to get this message to Bragg is to send a Major James Nolquit. I forget how to pronounce his last name, but this guy's a Frenchman who used to be on Bragg's staff and barely spoke. He just speaks broken English. And
Nolquit.
Yeah, exactly. And so he gets actually fired from Bragg's staff in 62, and Hinman decides that he'll pick him up for his staff. So they send him to tell Bragg what Bragg defines as, Bragg quotes as saying, a very incoherent report of the situation. And then Bragg has his chief of staff draft a new order for Hinman to continue with the plan, and also sends Nolquit back with a message directly for Hinman saying that the plan cannot be changed and that he would carry out his orders.
There's an interesting, at one point, Bragg got so frustrated with Nolquit, he said, I only want to know what you know as firsthand personal knowledge. Don't give me conjecture. Don't give me speculation, because Nolquit was talking about phantom forces here, there, and everywhere. And Bragg finally just said, I only want to know what you for sure know.
Which is nothing.
Which was not much. Right. And it was an absolute cluster. Just, this is a terrible black eye in the Army of Tennessee's history.
Like it's, I don't know if it's actually like Nolquit is trying to sabotage Bragg, or if this incompetent.
I think he's acting on orders from Hinman and others that are trying to do anything they can do to delay this attack.
Well, my thing is he goes back from after Bragg tells him that the plan cannot be changed and that he would carry out his orders. This is what he tell Hinman.
But they were verbal orders.
But he also had his chief of staff draft a plan, like another order to be also sent to Hinman's chief of staff. But then you have the whole, like, those orders were not as clear as stick to the plan. We are going in now.
They gave Hinman just enough reason to not follow them.
Yeah, pretty much. But I just love what Nolquit's translation of Bragg's orders is when he gets back to Hinman. He basically just tells him, I am doing my own plans, is what he tells Hinman.
Yeah.
It's just like, what is going on here?
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. If this happened in the Army Northern Virginia, these guys would be out of jobs within 2 days.
Well, I'm surprised with Bragg's level of punishment and strictness that he didn't start having people shot over this.
Well, he's going to have Polk removed about some things at Chickamauga.
Oh, yeah. No, he gets into it there.
Or try to have him removed.
So basically, after nearly confronting half of Bragg's army, Negley evacuates all of his wagon trains and supplies and escapes back into Stevens Gap on the day of the 11th. basically that attack never even materializes, and at the very end of the day, they get a little skirmish going at the end, but they're just catching the rear guards of Negley as he's pulling back into the gap. And come on, okay. All right. Wait a minute. I think this thing skipped a bunch. Man, some of these pictures, I guess, weren't allowed or something. I don't know. So basically, now we're going to see each side start concentrating forces over the next couple days. Rosecrans wants to concentrate forces northeast of Lee and Gordon's Mills. Oh, that's what this one was. This was my picture of Lee and Gordon's Mills. It's the actual picture of it from 1863. I'm pretty sure it was taken in 1863. Anyway, so they're going to try and concentrate northeast of Lee and Gordon's Mills with the rest of the 21st Corps. He's going to order McCook to Stevens Gap to join Thomas. And then that combined force is going to move to Ringgold to join Crittenden's forces. 4 scouts are going to continue to report movement of the 21st Corps. And they're going to place federal columns at Lee and Gordon's Mills, Ringgold, and then in between the two at Peavine Creek, making encampments. After Bragg leaves McClemmer's Cove, he then decides to turn around and order the same troops to go back and concentrate at Lafayette. Then he's going to change his mind again and order Polk back to his original position and in order to attack the Federals at Lee and Gordon's Mill on the night of the 11th. He's going to order Hindman to return to Polk's command as well as Walker's Reserve Corps and Buckner's command back north to support. However, neither command is going to arrive until later on. What is going on here? So basically on the 18th, scouts of the 14th Corps are going to bump into Polk's men while they're doing reconnaissance that morning, and that results in a small skirmish that really turns into more of a long-range artillery duel. While McCook's men are attempting to move northeast, his scouts skirmish with Breckinridge near Lafayette. Bragg calls off Polk's attack and orders Buckner and Wheeler's forces back towards Lafayette. And by the time, in order to deal with what he thinks is a bigger problem over there that Breckinridge is facing. But by the time that Confederates are back in Lafayette, McCook's men were back in Alpine, and the next day would reoccupy Lookout Mountain, heading north to rejoin the rest of the army, and they're going to get there 4 days later. Then that is the modern day Reed's Bridge, which is the site of the very start of the first day of the battle. September 18th, 1863. There you have a little map of Alexander's Bridge, and then also of Reed's Bridge.
Reed's Bridge is to the north, right?
Yes, so Reed's Bridge is going to be north, covered by, supposed to be covered by forest and headed to by Johnson's men. So basically, while they're concentrating his 2 remaining corps, Rosecrans is going to order Robert Minty to cover Crittenden's front left and Wilder's Lightning Brigade to fill the gap on the right, which is going to be down farther south. Minty and Wilder would cover the crossings at Reed and Alexander's Bridge, respectively. Bragg is going to decide to strike again in another attempt to hopefully pin the Federals in the mountains and crush them. He orders Buckner and Walker to cross West Chickamauga Creek at Alexander's Bridge, several miles north of LNG Mills. And then Bushrod Johnson, who is actually going to be a senior brigade officer and in command of the arriving troops from Virginia, the first brigades of the First Corps, they're going to move north and cross the creek at Reed's Bridge. The attack hinged completely on Johnson. So Buckner and Walker were ordered to wait until Johnson appeared on their right, and then with Forrest cavalry out front, clearing all opposition and hopefully all the obstacles and everything they would face, that combined force then would cross and execute a coordinated left wheel in order to crash down on the Union left at Lee and Gordon's Mills. There's going to be some more problems that we face right at the start of this. The attack is going to be delayed because Bushrod Johnson is actually going to start off on the wrong road, but eventually he'll find his way. And so Wagner and Buckner, they're also going to end up finding themselves on the same road at the same time, creating a huge cluster traffic jam. And then Forrest just completely F's off basically, and just isn't out in front at all for his whole mission, and leaves the army basically blind out in front. Minty's actually going to be able to hold off Johnson for over 2 hours. Eventually he's going to fall back though. And then Wilder's forces, though heavily outnumbered, are going to be able to completely force Walker and Buckner to redeploy and cross farther downstream at Lambert's Ford, which is going to be farther north.
So Dylan, please explain to our audience why are these units trying to cross Chickamauga Creek?
So basically, Bragg wants to get his forces across the creek in order to once again try and outflank and then pin the Federals against the mountain and crush them one corps at a time. He still believes, even though,
and also to cut off their route from Chattanooga, right?
Exactly. The whole point is to get on their flank and then in their rear and then cut them off from being able to retreat back to Chattanooga and then force them deeper south.
So big picture, these units are crossing Chickamauga Creek to try to flank the left flank of the Union Army with their right, and to kind of swing down Chickamauga Creek. And as each unit swings down Chickamauga Creek, they uncover each subsequent ford, and then those units can cross and start doing the same thing.
Exactly. And that's basically what's going to happen. It just happens a lot slower than Bragg was hoping for. So Hood is actually going to arrive after Johnson's final push. Hood claims in his memoirs that he arrived right before that and was the one who coordinated that whole final effort to get across. But by 9 p.m., Hinman's divisions are going to be firing the final shots of the day at the 21st Corps units that are at Lee and Gordon's Mills. Come on, this one too. So that night, we're going to see some more night marches, which is basically what the entire both armies have been doing for the past 2 or 3 nights in a row now. Hoping to get the jump on Bragg, Rosecrans is going to order Thomas's 14th Corps to send 2 of his divisions, Absalom Baird's 1st Division and Brandon's 3rd Division, about 8 miles north of Lee and Gordon's Mills to the fields of the Kelly farmstead. And he was supposed to move immediately. He wasn't, no waiting, and they took off that night. So they marched all night. They had a little 2-hour pause for the men to rest on the side of the road, obviously under arms. And they reached the Kelly fields around dawn. Now, this whole march, they talk about how they were using rail fences and lighting little fires along the whole way. And it looked like a tunnel lighting the way all the way to the Kelly fields. And then Rosecrans is also going to order Granger to send two brigades to assist Minty in the woods near Reed's Bridge. Forrest cavalry is eventually going to cross the creek that night and then make camp behind Walker and Buckner's men. The thing about these Federal movements was that Bragg was completely unaware of them. He thought that he was going to wake up in the morning and still be on the left flank of the entire Union Army and was going to be able to continue his plan and then roll their flank. But he had no idea of those dispositions until the morning. So here we have couple of maps from September 19th. I didn't think that this was going to be in the way yet, but here we are. Oh shit. So for that morning, Bragg is going to order Forrest to the right to feel out for the new enemy positions after receiving word from Pickett's that night. They're actually going to run into the men that Granger sent out to go assist Minty in the woods. The second brigade under Colonel Daniel McCook, who's then they're actually out looking for water when they run into Forest men. But McCook is then going to take that information back to Thomas, who then basically he's going to override Rosecrans here. He sends at 7 a.m. He orders Brandon's division to go forward with Baird's in support and find Forrest's flank. And after they engage, he's going to order John Palmer's 2nd Division of the 21st Corps to support their attack. And then Rosecrans is going to hear this and not actually freak out like he thought he would. He's like, yeah, all good, go for it. And then he's also going to send Richard Johnson's 2nd Division of the 20th Corps. So now you have all these separate commands from all these different corps fighting under Thomas. And that's kind of going to plague Rosecrans going into this. You have all these commands that are broken up under different commanders. Forrest is going to decide to stay and fight and sends Bragg for infantry support. Bragg then sends Liddell's division of Walker's Reserve, who eventually call for support as well. And then you just see this fight that starts growing from the right flank and this constant shifting of troops until they're engaged all the way down the line. So they call for support. And then Bragg is going to send in Cheatham's division to relieve them. Bragg is also going to order Polk to deploy the rest of his men. And then Cheatham then finds himself in a fight against Palmer and Johnson's division in around the Brock Field. This is going to be some of the heaviest fighting right here, and it's basically going to stalemate out. So here are our maps looking at it from noon to 2:30 on the left. So you have all the action that started the day up here that's slowly starting to shift its way down. You have all these guys, Liddell and Walker still back here. Cheatham's division is just starting to go in. Then you're going to see Stewart from Buckner's Corps get pulled out by Bragg, and they're actually going to achieve a limited breakthrough on Hood's right over here. So we'll start talking about that. So Rosecrans, hoping to find the rebel left flank, is going to send in Jefferson C. Davis's division into the Vineyard Field. It's going to be down here. Who are going to run headfirst into Johnson's attached division of Hood's Corps. And then that field is going to change hands back and forth 4 times between these troops. Bragg is then going to send in A.P. Stewart's division of Buckner's Corps to north to reinforce Cheatham's left, who is then going to achieve a breakthrough in the vicinity of the Poe Field. It's going to be right down here, just southwest of the Brotherton Field. They're actually going to be unsupported in their breakthrough and then eventually repelled by the arrival of Negley's 2nd Division and part of Brandon's 3rd Division. Then we have a couple more maps from 4 to 6 p.m. and then 7 to 9 p.m. on the second day on September 19th. So while Stewart was achieving his limited success, Hood and Johnson were dealing with Crittenden and Sheridan's lead brigades who had just arrived and were immediately put into action. So down here you have the forces of Crittenden's Corps, and then you also have Sheridan coming in, deploying his lead brigades. His lead brigade is actually going to be Bradley's brigade, which is the 27th Illinois Home Brigade, and they're going to be put in by the right flank, or I'm sorry, on the right by file into line right off of the road, and they are going to file in right into the fight. So they're all going to be basically dealing with their own problems and unable to support Stewart's success as his breakthrough in breaking through in the center right there. And he's actually going to fall back. In a last-ditch effort, Breckinridge is ordered to support Cleburne in a final attack on the right, and they arrive at dusk. Pretty much a similar stalemate is going to happen, and the day's fighting is going to end around 9 p.m. that night, the men of both armies will spend the night on the front lines. And since they're in such close vicinity to each other, both armies had orders to make no fires. And even though the temperatures were dropping below freezing, they didn't want to give away positions. And yeah, there was no fires allowed. So these guys were absolutely freezing. A lot had actually dropped their packs going into the beginning of the assault at the beginning of the day and never picked them back up from their new positions. And yeah, so a lot of guys were without blankets, without greatcoats. Really a terrible night that first night.
And the Federals suffered for water because if you look at the map, the Confederates had taken Chickamauga Creek. And so there was a huge drought in North Georgia around this time. And so the Federals really had a scarcity of water that night as well.
Exactly. And that was a thing that plagued them on the marches too, is like these marches, these guys were talking about how dusty the roads were, choking them up the whole time. And then also, yeah, during the battle right here, once the Confederates push onto the west side of Chickamauga Creek, it effectively cuts the Federals off from their main water supply right there. Like I said, McCook's brigade, when they were going into the fight that very morning, they were just looking for water when they ran into Forrest men. So after the second day's fight on the 19th, you're going to have casualties between 6,000 and 9,000 Confederates and 7,000 Federals. It's kind of hard to estimate because obviously casualty reports are taken it like in total for the end of the battle. Longstreet is going to arrive that night at about 11 p.m., at which point Bragg is going to give him command over the left wing of the army and Polk the right wing. Rosecrans is going to hold a council of war to decide on his next move. They're going to meet at the Widow Glen cabin, which is south of Poe Field. All the generals agree basically that any attack the next morning is going to fall on Thomas's left. Pretty much all generals were in agreement that Thomas's left was the main point of concern. They decide to reinforce the left. So McCook and Crittenden are ordered to hold and be prepared to reinforce Thomas. And then Thomas is also, after this meeting, when he gets back to camp, he's going to send a message to Rosecrans requesting a return of Negley's division, who had been part of Crittenden's forces that day. Rosecrans is actually going to stay up all night, making adjustments, sending messages, surveying his lines. And then at dawn is when he gets up and starts writing his lines. And at 6 a.m., he's going to reach George Thomas's sector, where he basically agrees with him that his left needs to be reinforced, and he's going to send him Negley. He's going to agree to send him Negley that morning after thinking about it all night. And then that is basically going to send a chain reaction of Rosecrans shifting troops to the left constantly. And this is going to be done at the detriment of his own right flank. So Negley basically is ordered to pull out and form on Absalom Baird's left. And then McCook is ordered to replace him in the center immediately. Unfortunately, McCook is not going to arrive in time, and he's actually going to order Thomas Wood's 1st Division of the 21st Corps to fill that gap that is thereafter appeared. So that brings us to the start of the 3rd day of the battle on September 20th, 1863. We have a map from the American Battlefield Trust. All these maps I've been showing are from the American Battlefield Trust, by the way. This is 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. You're going to see Cleburne and Breckinridge are going to be the first ones to open up the assault for that day, continuing their attack from the day before. So Bragg's plan remains completely the same. He doesn't call a council of war. He divides his 2 wings and then says stick to the plan. So they're going to try to break through the Federal line and push them south away from Chattanooga. And his orders are for Hill's Corps to renew the fight at dawn. But of course, Cleburne doesn't get the fight going until around 9 a.m. Cleburne and Breckinridge open up the fight on Thomas's left near the McDonald House up here, which you can barely see. I know these maps are really small. So then Brannon's 3rd Division, who had been in reserve the night before, but unfortunately, Rosecrans is going to make adjustments to Palmer's division, to his formation, basically just going to bunch up Palmer's division real tight. And then Joe Reynolds is going to be on the right of Palmer, who is then realized, like, okay, now I had to close up. And so there's this big gap on my right. So he's going to send to Brannon, who he knows is in reserve, to strengthen his right. Who Brannon is only going to have 1 brigade then left in reserve. That's going to be Van Derver. I don't even know how to say his name exactly. But neither Thomas or Rosecrans had been made aware of this change in positions, and that's going to be a problem. So then Thomas is then going to order Brannon to reinforce his left, thinking that he has the whole division in reserve. Brannon is then going to send him Van Derver. Unfortunately, that's not going to be enough for Thomas, and he sends back asking again for Brannon to move. He talks to Reynolds, who assures him, like, yeah, okay, I guess you're going to be all right. I guess I'm going to be okay without you. But just as Brannon begins to move, he sends word to Rosecrans. And just then, Stewart's division of Buckner's Corps launched their assault. So seeing them launch their assault, Brannon then decides, okay, I can't leave. I'm going to stay in my position, and Thomas is just going to have to deal with it. Unfortunately, they sent word to Rosecrans saying he was going to move, but they didn't send another one saying that they canceled that order. So now Rosecrans thinks that there's actually a gap caused by Brannon's move, at which point Rosecrans is going to make the infamous decision to order Wood's division to close up on Reynolds. So that's where you really got to be aware of what was going on. You have all these constant shifts that are starting at the left end of Rosecrans' line, all the way at the left of Thomas. And it's just this constant shifting of troops until they can't anymore because they're being attacked. Only Rosecrans still thinks that this movement has happened and therefore thinks that there's a gap that doesn't actually exist. Did I make sense on that? I know that was that's like the confusing part of this whole battle.
Yeah, but I want to talk later about the miscarried orders on the night of the before. Why DHL didn't attack first thing.
Okay, we can definitely get to that. I'm gonna try to get through this because now we got more confusion and more missed orders. So basically, once Wood moves, it creates an actual gap in between Davis and Negley. Wood had been chastised before in the campaign for not following orders from Rosecrans, so he decides almost in a petty fashion, like, I know that there is no gap, but he ordered me, so I'm gonna go. He actually, that's a little bit of a debatable topic because he actually also requests confirmation from McCook, who is the one saying, like, listen, you've been chewed out before, you need to go. And he promises Wood that he is going to fill the gap by shifting Davis's division up to the left and filling it right as he moves. Unfortunately, just as Wood begins to move, or just as he finishes his movement, he has one brigade that's about to make their movement left. That's when Longstreet's column steps off, and Johnson's division in the lead of this massive assault force, which is 5 lines deep, slams into the last of Wood's brigade as they're pulling out and beginning to move up their shift up left. At the same time, Hinman's division is going to advance and force Davis and Sheridan basically into a rout. And that's when Johnson is going to look to his south, because remember, the orders is to break through and push the enemy south away from Chattanooga. Johnson's going to look south and see no enemy forces left to engage and decides, okay, well, what do I do now? He looks to his superiors, where he finds out that Hood has now been wounded and is out of the fight, and decides, like, okay, well, I got all these Yankees running away to my north. I might as well just pursue them. And after pausing a little bit to bring up his men, let them catch their breath, and then resupply ammo, he decides to turn north. Here we have a picture of the line of Bushrod, Johnson, and Hinman's assault on Snodgrass Hill. I'm actually not sure when this picture was taken, but I just thought it was kind of cool. So here's where we're going to have Thomas's final stand. So having been cut off from Thomas's Corps and Granger's Reserve further north in Rossville and facing isolation and ultimately destruction, Rosecrans, Crittenden, and McCook all retreat to Chattanooga. Rosecrans is actually going to be the first one to get there. When he arrives, he's described as being completely disheartened, broken spirit, almost like he's sick. It's basically going to be political suicide for Rosecrans having left the field. We'll get into all of that, all the effects of Rosecrans' decision there. But basically, Thomas is now going to be the only Corps commander left on the field. Hood, seriously wounded at the start of the assault. Only one of his brigades, Kershaw, would continue to engage alongside Johnson. Johnston then sends to Longstreet for help. Longstreet, in a jovial mood, is absolutely ecstatic. She says that they have fought to their last man, and even he is running. Longstreet then is going to assign Hinman to go north and support Johnson and Kershaw's assault. The remaining brigades under Wood, Brennan, and Reynolds now rally to make a stand around Thomas's Corps on Snodgrass Hill and what is now being referred to as Horseshoe Ridge. Granger, hearing the fighting to the south, sends Brigadier General James Steedman and 2 brigades to support. That leaves Dan McCook's brigade to guard the Rossville Gap. It's the only he was actually disobeying orders there because he had orders to guard that Rossville Gap, but he knew that, look, there's obviously big fighting going on to my south. I can leave them here and I'm going to go find out what's going on. So Steedman arrives just in time. Steedman's going to extend the line on Horseshoe Ridge to the right, and they arrive basically just in time to repulse Preston's division, who had just been ordered in by Breckinridge. And then there we have a view from the top of Snodgrass Hill. And we have our map showing the final positions of the Union, of the 14th Corps here under Thomas. So it's basically in 2 different positions now. You have what's known as the Kelly Field line here on with Baird, Johnson, and Palmer and Reynolds. And then to their right, separated on another hilltop, which is what is now being referred to as Horseshoe Ridge, you have Steedman, Brannan, and Wood. So basically, Thomas is going to make a stand here, and he's going to have messengers coming in from Rosecrans, informing him of the situation, telling him to pull out. His messenger is going to see that Thomas is making a stand and send word back to Rosecrans that, hey, they have all these troops here and they're making a stand, and I think they can hold out until dark. You need to come and reinforce them. Unfortunately, by the time Rosecrans is getting that message, Thomas is going to be almost every one of his men is going to be on their last few cartridges, knowing that even if they could find their supply wagons, there's still a chance that they'd be overran by the time they got resupplied. And so then Thomas is going to decide to retreat. The only way actually to do that in an organized fashion was to escape through McFarland's Gap, which was up here by Geist's men and the rest of Breckinridge, as well as Armstrong of Forrest Cavalry, which is going to be guarding the road. The only way out was through McDonald's Field and through McFarland's Gap to reach Rossville without being exposed to flank attacks by the rebel cavalry. Thomas then sends John Turchin, a Russian-born man, in his brigade to clear the way out. They actually end up catching Liddell by the flank and by surprise and clear them out of McDonald Field. From south to north, each division on the Kelly Field line began to pull out through McFarland Gap, west to Missionary Ridge. Polk's men then bring up artillery and start firing on the retreating Yankees and make several charges on Baird's men, which result in several hundred Federal prisoners from that division. Then around at 6 p.m., the Federals that are left on Horseshoe Ridge begin to make their escape. Steedman, Brandon, and Wood all retreat as Hinman and Preston make another assault on their flanks. Pretty much all of those divisions make their escape except for the 21st, 89th Ohio, and the 22nd Michigan, who are all separated from their commands, their normal commands. As I mentioned earlier, there's all these different commands switched around, and they end up left without orders to retreat. And by the time they get them, they had been surrounded and basically forced into surrendering, and that's going to result in another 600 or so federal prisoners. And here we have a painting of Missionary Ridge, which is going to be the fighting later in November of that year. That night, Bragg is going to halt any further pursuit of the retreating Federals. Most of the Army of the Tennessee is actually going to, they expect a renewed Federal attack first thing in the morning. They don't realize how far back the Yankees have actually retreated. And then at the end of the 3 days fighting, obviously there are over 35,000 casualties. Bragg is going to decide on a cautious advance on the Federals' new defensive positions instead of an all-out pursuit. And then he prepares to lay siege to the town. Rosecrans decides to dig in around Chattanooga and Missionary Ridge. And then in October, Major General Ulysses S. Grant will end up replacing Rosecrans. Bragg, heavily criticized for not immediately pursuing Rosecrans, despite logistical problems in actually doing so. After the battle, Bragg is going to relieve Polk and Hinman for their failures throughout the campaign. And then Hill is going to be transferred to North Carolina, effectively benched out for the rest of the war. Davis ends up visiting the camp later that year and convinces Bragg to actually drop his official charges against Polk. And then Longstreet is going to take his corps northeast. What did I just do? Oh, crap. Basically, he's going to go back northeast into Knoxville and try to recapture that town. And that campaign is going to be plagued with failures as well.
Bragg had trouble. Bragg could not convince himself that he'd won a victory that day. He was totally detached from the field, and he just had he couldn't. Everybody was telling him that the Yankees were on the run, but he couldn't convince himself that they had won.
Yeah, he basically is obsessed with his supply lines and logistical problems and worried with all these different possibilities, basically every excuse in the book not to go after the Federals. Here I have some things to consider after this. So you got to consider Bragg's own contradictory and vague orders were just as damaging as the apprehension or outright refusal to execute them, even the more clear orders by his subordinates. So his subordinates refusing or being apprehensive to those orders pretty much did just as much damage as Bragg's own orders that he's giving back and forth, canceling, changing his mind. So yes, he was plagued with insubordination, but at the same time, he didn't do himself any favors by not making orders clear to them in the first place for most of them. Rosecrans' paranoia and lack of accurate and timely information of the affairs along his whole line caused the constant shifting of troops to support his left flank, which led to the ultimate collapse of his right. On September 19th, by 11 a.m., virtually his entire right wing of his army is on the move at the same time to fill the gap supposedly created by Brandon, who was ironically the only division not in motion on the right. And was it logistically possible for Bragg to pursue the Federal Army any more aggressively than he actually did? And we'll get to that question here in a second. One thing I was actually looking at was Longstreet jockeying for independent command all along? When they're thinking about sending reinforcements to when Davis is thinking about this and he's thinking about sending them to Bragg, one of the options on the table was to replace Bragg as a corps commander. And he actually said Longstreet was the one who writes a letter to Lee asking Lee, hey, send me down there. I'll take command. He can come up here and have my corps, and I'll do his job better. Another idea behind it is that he wanted to be in a closer working relationship with Joseph Johnston, who he would then bring into the army. So that's something to think about right there, because obviously after the campaign, he does get his own independent command to go to Knoxville, and we all see how that turns out.
Fails miserably.
And then other than the appointment of new commanders and the loss of men, how else did the battle affect the upcoming Atlanta campaign? These are all just some things I figured we could talk about and discuss here. We're not completely out of time. And then here's pretty much all my reading material and things I got information from. Book called Decisions at Chickamauga by Dave Powell, and a book called The Maps of Chickamauga by the same author. Company H, of course, by Sam Watkins, and the American Battlefield Trust website. They have so many different kinds of maps, as well as their animated battle map, which is very helpful in making this whole deal.
Very good.
Thank you. Bring back up things to consider. I also actually have to plug this in real quick. So you guys discuss that. So
Ben, you're critical here of Polk, and you what's his original sin here? What's your take on Polk?
Well, Polk and Bragg had always had this kind of bad relationship going back to Perryville, and maybe even before that. There was a lot of bad blood from Murfreesboro and spills over into this campaign. But I think Polk, a couple of days after the Macklemore Cove fiasco with Hinman and Claiborne, Polk completely failed to attack an isolated Union Corps on his flank of the Army, in which Bragg really wanted him to do that. And so there's one. And then the second one was on the evening of the second day, transitioning into day 3, Bragg inexplicably divides the army into 2 wings. He takes Longstreet had just arrived on the field at 11 p.m. and he tells Longstreet, "You're going to be in command of roughly half my army, although you've never met one of these individuals. You've never been on the ground, and welcome to the Army of Tennessee." So he puts, I don't know why he does this, but I don't think he knew what to do with Longstreet. So he puts him in command of a left wing. Polk is elevated to command the right wing, and he tells Polk, "I want you to attack first thing in the morning on the right. It's going to be an echelon attack, right to left, down the line." And he says, "I want you to attack first thing in the morning." And Polk sends out a courier to give D.H. Hill the orders, and that courier cannot find D.H. Hill. Polk, instead of trying to figure this out that night, just assumes that D.H. Hill is going to get orders from Bragg to make the assault. And so he doesn't try to find D.H. Hill. D.H. Hill, meanwhile, is trying to find Bragg's headquarters. And he can't find Bragg's headquarters. And so D.H. Hill is trying to find Bragg. Polk's trying to find D.H. Hill. And there's just this confusion. And so the next morning, Bragg is in the saddle early in the morning. He's wondering why the attack doesn't go off. And and Polk finally sends an order, finally locates D.H. Hill, sends the order to attack, and D.H. Hill says, "I had no idea that we were supposed to attack this early. My men are having breakfast." And so the attack is completely delayed until 9, 10 in the morning. Meanwhile, the Federals have created breastworks, earthen entrenchments, they're improving their lines. And so, I don't know, I just think Leonidas Polk is just not the man to command. He probably, in my opinion, is probably the worst corps commander of the Confederate Army. Period. End of story. I don't understand why he puts Longstreet in command of the left wing, although it worked out fine for him just because of the gap that opened up. Longstreet was the beneficiary of that gap. It isn't anything that Longstreet did. And I've heard historians give Longstreet a lot of credit for, putting his men in these deep um,
five
lines.
lines deep.
Yeah, but I don't. That was just the way that the line shook out that evening. It wasn't anything that Longstreet did. He got there at 11 p.m.
What
So
Longstreet that I'll give him credit for. When Bragg realized that his attack wasn't going the way he had actually planned, you have Polk putting in guys piecemeal, and then you have Longstreet's front Bushrod Johnson's men getting repulsed after their first assault. Bragg actually sends one of his aides to go down the line and start putting divisions in personally, one by one. Longstreet sees this happening and says, okay, well, I don't want this to piecemeal my attack, and decides to send in that 5-column attack force all at once. It just so happened he didn't
yes.
see, his front open up. He didn't see this gap created by wood. That just happened at the same time. That just talks to the terrible luck faced by Rosecrans's decisions to keep shifting his men up to the left. That's just terrible timing right there.
Maybe Longstreet learned a lesson from Gettysburg. Don't put your men in by echelon. Maybe you ought to send them all in at the same time.
Exactly.
Okay.
What happened when an echelon attack, tries to fold out after it's already been blown. And he said, no, I'm not dealing with that, and sends in his whole force.
And I'll give him credit for that. But so I just think Polk useless. And maybe Bragg was putting him in the right wing command just to kind of promote him above where he can do me any real harm. But
he's not directly commanding troops. He can't screw it all up.
But he still screwed it up because DHL never got the orders. So it's a cluster. I do think Bragg shares some responsibility for the contradictory and maybe vague orders, and just in giving his subordinates too much discretion, because they would use that discretion not to attack, but to rein in. And again, you just see a different culture of command in the Army of Tennessee than you have in the Army of Northern Virginia. Lee gives a lot of discretion, and his commanders are urged to do good, aggressive things. Bragg's men just shrink from it.
Would you go so far as to consider the Army of Tennessee the JV team, or do you think that's a disservice to them?
I think it's a recreational team. It's a dysfunctional team. If the Army North, it just was not a cohesive organization based a lot on Bragg. He was the commander of it, but I don't think it was all Bragg's fault.
The Army of Tennessee at this time honestly reminds me a lot of the Army of the Potomac in 1862.
Very political.
It's all political. There's all dissension, a lot of big egos, and a lot of jockeying for other people's commands. Like it's just a fashion show of commanders that don't know what they're doing. And I think honestly, the fighting men of these Western armies are some of the toughest in the entire war. The terrain that they go through, the amount of mileage that they have to cover, the conditions, and their supplies are worse off than everything in Virginia.
I want to read a quote here.
As grand of battles as those in Virginia, but the fighting men of the Western armies, I would go as far to say, are in worse, like they are going through quote unquote, going through the shit worse than what's going on in Virginia. And then on top of it, they have much, much more incompetent commanders than what's going on in Virginia.
I have one thing to contribute real quick, and then I'll let Ben read his quote. But do you think part of that, or at least a contributing factor, is kind of this shifting around of command? You have the Army of Northern Virginia, which is concentrated in and around Richmond and has a pretty narrow scope of what they're responsible for. And then you have about 5 states worth of territory and the Mississippi River to cover between the rest of the armies. And throughout the war, you see all this shifting of command, from Vicksburg to Bragg's command and away up to Knoxville or down to New Orleans. Do you think all of that territory management is a contributing factor into this disorganization of I'd almost go so far as to say armies of Tennessee, because it's really, there's not as much consistency there.
you have definitely it's Western armies. You have, the Army of the Mississippi, Trans-Mississippi Department. You have Buckner's forces in Knoxville. You have the Army of Tennessee itself. You have all these different forces combined over this huge array of land, and every single one of them are undermanned in the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, obviously, this was the main argument for these Western armies going into the summer campaigns of 63. This is what Lee is arguing against, saying that it doesn't matter if they have this much to cover, because if I can go into Pennsylvania and win this war, it's over. And so that was really what this whole, it's all reliant upon Lee, because you have all this land at the start of 63, but is slowly chipped away because they're not reinforced, because they decided to reinforce the Army of Northern Virginia and put their focus. The Confederacy put all their eggs in one basket, and that basket dropped at Gettysburg. And after that, they go back to the same argument that they were having before the campaign, saying, hey, we need more troops out here in the West. We have all this more land to cover, and now we're worse off than we were before. And that's going to play into a big part of Davis's decisions of who to send there and how many and who's going to command. And, originally he wanted to send Lee. Davis wanted to send Lee to go replace Bragg as commander of that army. Lee obviously didn't want to depart his home from Virginia, and says, if that's where I'm needed, I'll go, but I'd rather stay here. That's when, Longstreet actually sends a letter to Lee saying that he would be willing to go. So,
oh yes, please send me. I will go take command of that army, General Lee. No, come on.
That's what I wanted to get into. So he writes Lee asking for 3 brigades from Richmond and to take Bragg's command and give Bragg his corps.
How utterly ludicrous for a lieutenant general to suggest this.
I know. And so I actually have, if you have the ORs, it's OR volume 29, part 2. If you have that one accessible, which I'm sure you do.
I've got 30 here.
In volume 29, part 2, page 699 is where that letter is.
Well, I'll go get it. Hold on a minute, but I want to read this quote real quick.
All right, go ahead.
This is Moxley Sorrell when they arrived in Tennessee. The Army of Tennessee gave one the feeling of a very loose organization. There were indeed corps, so called, but not that compact shoulder-to-shoulder makeup of Lee's army. There, a First Corps man would so speak of himself, just as a 3rd Georgia Regiment man would speak of the regiment to which he belonged. The artillery, which seemed to me not as strong as should be, looked a bit primitive. The battalion unit was not often met with, but on the contrary, many single independent batteries nominally attached to infantry commands, but on the day of the battle, wandering loose, hunting for their supports. The subsistence and quartermaster's departments were well supplied with food and forage, but weak in transportation. And here we go. The tone of the army among its higher officers toward their commander was the worst conceivable. Bragg was the subject of hatred and contempt, and it was almost openly so expressed. His great officers gave him no confidence as a general-in-chief. The army was thus left a helpless machine, and its great disaster in November at Missionary Ridge and Lookout Mountain could easily be foreseen with Bragg retained in command.
Jeez, you let him have it's accurate. That's pretty much, if you don't even have to read that to get that out of it. You can see that just in the basic decision making that is going on throughout every campaign.
But Bragg is being undermined by his subordinates.
No, 100%.
He absolutely is. And that doesn't make some of the things he did right, but his subordinates absolutely failed him. What volume do I need to go get? 29?
Yeah, volume 29.
Part what?
2.
Okay, I'll be back.
Yeah, you see that with Polk too. I mean, Polk is literally openly insubordinate, and whenever he gets called on it, he just Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis is like, don't worry about that guy. Because they're just buds. Everyone's buds with Jefferson Davis except for Bragg.
Except Bragg, right?
And Johnston, but Johnston is the lesser of 2 weevils in Davis's eyes.
Well, I mean, to some extent, you got to keep your men happy, and everyone knew that Bragg wasn't doing that, and Johnston was. So I think
Okay.
it was a morale move. Go ahead.
You guys are not going to believe this, but I have 2 blue strips in volume 29, part 2.
Yeah. Okay.
And what page did you tell me this letter was on?
699.
And one of them is 695 and the other is 699.
Yeah.
Now, this is
Long street.
I had already seen this letter a long time ago. This is for my research for my other book. This is September 5th, right? 1863.
Yeah.
Lee to Longstreet, or yeah, no, Longstreet to Lee.
Sounds right.
If this army is ready to assume offensive operations, I think that it would be better for us to remain on the defensive here and to reinforce the West and take the offensive there. We can hold here with a smaller force than we would require for offensive operations. And if it should become necessary to retire as far as Richmond temporarily, I think that we could better afford to do so than we can to give up any more of our Western country. I will say more. I think that it is time that we had begun to do something in the West, and I fear it is put off much longer. We shall be too late. If my corps cannot go west, I think that we might accomplish something by giving me Jenkins, Wise's, and Cook's brigades, who are, one of them is from Longstreet's corps, the other 2 are not, and putting me in General Bragg's place and giving him my corps. A good artillery battalion should go with these brigades. We would surely make no great risk in such a change, and we might gain a great deal. I feel that I am influenced by no personal motive, of course not, James, in this suggestion, and will most cheerfully give up when we have a fair prospect of holding our Western country. So he says, put me in command until we can get things in order, and then put whoever you want back in command. I doubt if General Bragg has confidence in his troops or himself either. He is not likely to do a great deal for us. Unbelievable. I had this marked.
That's hilarious. That marked already. I had a feeling you were going to have that ready.
But notice they don't do this.
Of course
Davis
not.
doesn't like the idea. Lee doesn't like the idea.
Because
Lee-
it's not an idea.
Well, and could you imagine Lee trying to work with Bragg? I mean, you think Lee and Longstreet didn't get along?
Well, they got along, but but I just don't think Longstreet served him well at Gettysburg. But
I don't know.
what hubris? I mean,
yeah, I mean, you have to look at it like this. Longstreet obviously felt really close to Lee, and that he could, he was the guy that was going to offer him that differing opinion. But I think in this case, he may have had still some salt left in his boot from Gettysburg, and then B, also taken that relationship a little too far in suggesting that, hey, you should just promote me to command of an army and send whoever you want here because it's not going to be my problem anymore. That's just like almost open insubordination, because Bragg is obviously, a higher rank than Longstreet is. And you can't, I don't know. I feel like that right there, it really speaks to Longstreet wanting to jockey for independent command right there.
Yeah, and as soon as he got down there and got a dose of Bragg, and Bragg got a dose of Longstreet, guess what happened? As soon as Chickamauga was over, he sent him up to Knoxville to get rid of him.
Yeah. He almost immediately after the battle is over decides, writes to Jeff Davis saying, "Hey, can you just send this guy? There's some. Oh yeah, we got to deal with this stuff in Knoxville." But he didn't care. He just wanted Longstreet out of there.
He did.
Then he immediately lost
to the detriment.
Lookout Mountain.
Yeah, to the detriment of Chattanooga.
I mean,
yeah.
What, a week after sending Longstreet north, Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge fall? I mean,
yeah, about a month. But yeah, I mean, it was.
How do you lose Lookout Mountain?
Yeah. So did you say there was a letter where Longstreet asked Lee to come west?
No, David asked Lee to come west. Let me see if I can.
Because I saw a letter in the ORs that intimated that Polk asked Lee to come west too after Chickamauga, and Lee said he couldn't do it.
Also, just a heads up, we're pushing 2 hours here, so
Oh, are we?
yeah.
I think, Chickamauga is a great battle, but one of the things that strikes me about it is the piecemeal way in which it was fought by Bragg. I mean, it was one brigade here, a brigade here, a brigade there, and the second, especially on the second day, and
Right.
it was not a well coordinated thing.
The problem with Chickamauga is each army is committing both of their forces piecemeal. You have Rosecrans that's only focused on his left, and he's just shifting troops down there. Doesn't even care what's going on down in Poe Field or the Vineyard Field. He's sending everyone up to Thomas's left, and that's ultimately what destroys his army. It wasn't like this massive Confederate breakthrough as overwhelming. I mean, that eventually happened, but it's this chain reaction that causes that to happen, and it's really Rosecrans defeating himself in the actual battle of what happened. It's Rosecrans defeating himself because had that had he just been more hands off, more laissez-faire, and letting his corps commanders actually handle each of their sectors without shifting all these different commands everywhere, you never get that pullout of Wood's division, and then you never. I mean, at what point are they going to be overwhelmed? I think you just have this stalemate that would go into the night, and then you'd have a completely different day on the 20th.
I,
But it's
I
really
agree.
because this is these. I mean, going into this presentation, I realized like, oh wow, this is the second biggest battle of the whole war. There are many moving pieces here, lots of different brigades engaged.
Yeah, it's a very complicated battle, I think.
It is, and we kind of just glossed over the leading into it, but there is so many. Like other than McLemer's Cove, you have like what you were saying at the Rock Springs. You have like where the battle almost kicks off happens almost 3 or 4 different times before it actually finally does. But yeah, it's so interesting to actually get into it because I've always been focused on A&V, Eastern Theater stuff, but to really break down and get into this was cool for me to actually really get into.
In the ORs, there are deposition statements and sworn statements by couriers that are affirming under oath that they did this or that to try to find D.H. Hill that night. And because of the charges against Polk and all of this sort of stuff, it's pretty interesting to read.
Yeah, it's so much drama.
Yeah. Yeah, all the AOT officers definitely would have been on Twitter.
Oh yeah.
None of the ANV guys would have been on Twitter, but all of the AOT guys would have been on Twitter.
Subtweeting each other.
It would have been just a mess. But
Yeah.
no, this was good. So what do we have next, guys? Do we have a
I
next
don't know.
subject next?
Do we want to do another battle or campaign, or do we want to do a theme?
Well, let's talk about it. We can talk about it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I mean,
Sounds
I
good.
doing these battle ones. I hope we didn't put anybody to sleep out there going through the campaign, but I enjoy doing these studies of these different battles. That's really what I'm into. But
sure.
obviously, we're out here for the reenactors and for the history buffs and anybody like we have so many different topics we could cover. So if there's anything you guys want to hear us talk about, please let us know. I mean, this was brought to our attention to do this topic because we're coming up on the 160th anniversary here next weekend.
Yeah.
Going to that event, come by the Alton Jaeger Guard camp and say what's up to Ben and myself. We'll be there with a few of our friends. And then there's just a lot of great people. This is going to be a pretty big event. It's not an authentic event, but this is the last type of events you're going to see where there's thousands of people in a line fighting each other, and that's cool to me. So it made people are into different things. People are into the living history, authentic stuff. People are into only mainstream stuff. I think it's good to get out there and get both. So I'm excited for that event. I'm excited to see Ben again and get the gang back together. And then also next weekend, you're going to Gettysburg next weekend, right?
I am, yes. Yeah, I'm going to be giving I would be at Chickamauga perhaps if I wasn't. I'm going to be giving a presentation on Perrin's South Carolina Brigade at Gettysburg for the Savas Beatty author meetup, which is scheduled for next weekend. There's going to be tours of Antietam, Gettysburg, with presentations by authors at the Gettysburg Heritage Center. Anybody interested can go to savasbeatty.com. They have the sign up there.
I think
Meet us.
I think it's sold out, Ben. Unfortunately,
I think it is. It might be actually. So we just got our final agenda today. We're going to be doing Antietam on Friday with some author presentations on Friday afternoon in Gettysburg with a meet and greet Friday night, and then battlefield tours Saturday morning and Sunday morning. We're going to do a great tour with James Hessler out for Pickett's Charge, who's going to focus on Trimble. We're going to do the first Minnesota on Saturday. And we're going to do a couple of Antietam vignettes on Friday. So it's going to be really cool. And then I'll be giving my presentation on Saturday at 2:00 at the Gettysburg Heritage Center. So,
Awesome.
yeah, thanks for doing this, gentlemen. This is a good, a great episode, and appreciate it.
Yeah, I had a good to see you guys again. Everyone, safe travels next weekend. If you're going
you too.
Going out to Gettysburg, if you're going out to the 160th Chick, get there safe. Have a great time. I'm excited to get that going for sure. You guys have fun this weekend at the local muster that you have going on as well.
We will. We'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.
Bye.